Hello, and on the gaming table today, we're taking a look at battle number 5 in the Strength and Honor campaign. So once again, this is the fictional Mithridatic Wars. Before Sulla joins, there are just local Roman forces opposing the invasion of the Kingdom of Pontus. So the Pontic forces, led by Chares, are there. They're building up quite a bit of experience now. Also on the Roman side, Livius's command has crossed the threshold for lots of bonuses and things as well, but they've been suffering from losses in prior battles, so they've also got some negatives or some disabilities on their forces as well. Now, here's the battle for today. After the last rather disastrous loss by the Romans, they've decided to try and use some hills to their benefit, and there's a patch of rough ground on their left as well. The omens for the Romans are not so good. They don't have very many points on their command board, whereas the Kingdom of Pontus forces looks pretty healthy there. So the Romans deployed at the top of the screen. They're pretty solid there in a line on the hills, and they've got their skirmishers on the left of the picture, the Roman right flank, to try and guard against the Pontic cavalry, which is in the left at the bottom of the picture here. The Pontic forces began to move up on the left, and the Roman forces did nothing. They just sat firmly on their hill waiting for the Pontic forces to come at them. So over the preceding turns, the Pontic forces just kept advancing, but they kept things going steadily and maintained their formations. At times things got a little bit broken up, but they would always reform it in the next turn. At one stage, as the cavalry started to get close, the skirmishers started to move to the right further to not get outflanked by the cavalry, and also maybe to flank the cavalry in turn. And the Pontic line kept fairly solid as they moved up. One other move made by the Pontics was to flare their skirmishers on the right flank out to be beyond charge or beyond frontal arc there of the warbands, which were holding the Roman left, and they're getting into a position perhaps to flank the warbands. The warbands don't have very good maneuverability to go sideways, and so that was what the Pontics were relying on here. Now, the moment when things really started to happen is the Romans tried to flank around the cavalry here, but one of the units of skirmishers got isolated when another one failed to get the order and move across. So that led to the Pontics charging in here. And in that charge, the first unit of skirmishers started to get forced back. And so did the second, getting pushed back by Chares and his companion cavalry here. The skirmishers also managed to get into a position where they could threaten the flank of the warband. They're not engaged in combat there, but they are able to stop the warband really moving forward very much because they'll be able to pelt them with missiles and so on. That gave the Pontic forces kind of the initiative to choose when to charge. And so this was how the lines looked after the first small engagements on the left side of the picture there, with the Romans still on their hill, but they're getting a little bit worried about the status of both of their flanks. The skirmishers tried to move back up to maintain the line, but they were always going to be outnumbered by the cavalry here. And the warbands tried to sidle across. They wanted to go sideways there to get into a position to attack the skirmishers. However, they were unable to pull off that complicated maneuver. Finally, in the second engagement here, the cavalry managed to break one of the units of skirmishers who fell back in a position basically where they were no longer going to take part in the battle. The phalanx over here tried to charge into the warband from long range, however it failed to make the distance. At this point the Romans could see that their flanks were in trouble, and so they tried to push down off the hill to engage the Pontic phalanxes. They do have a couple of positions here where qualitatively they actually are in a better position than the Pontics, but that's only in one or two spots. Generally speaking, they're out-qualitied here by the phalanxes on the Pontic side. While one unit of cavalry kind of got tangled up with the skirmishers here, Chares charged into Livius's legion here, the most experienced legion on the Roman side. However, the legion firmly held their ground in the first encounter. The phalanxes started to charge in here against the legions, and in the first encounter here, one legion decided they'd had enough for today, and they ran retiring back towards their camp. With that crack in the line now made, the other phalanxes started to engage. The skirmishers also managed to sidle across into the flank of the warbands here and managed to beat them up and push them back, and that kind of disrupted the line here for the Roman side. So for the Romans, things not looking good. They've already had some units falling back here and their line getting a little bit disrupted on the left. While on the right, it seems like the Pontic cavalry is in complete control of the situation. The Romans do have a little bit of a qualitative advantage here with a very combat experienced legion on the right here, trying to push back against the Thureophoroi and a relatively weak raw pike phalanx. Manages to push off the Thureophoroi okay, but still gets tangled up with the other phalanx here. And its less experienced legion partner is unable to do anything about that rather stubborn phalanx that's in front of it. It does manage to knock out the skirmishers, but that's about it. The skirmishers here try to engage in missile combat, shooting actions against the cavalry here, however there's no effect. And Livius with his legion tries to push back against Chares' cavalry on the hill, however Chares fights them off. The warbands here finally manage to pull off a tricky maneuver with the weaker warband in the rear managing to line back up with its fellows in front, so now it's a bit more combat capable. However, the front warband is unable to push back the pike phalanx. So things here again, not looking too good for the Romans, under pressure in a lot of areas. Really only in the centre have they had any luck with pushing back the Thureophoroi. One unit of cavalry here on the Pontic side keeps engaging these skirmishers, but the skirmishers hold them at bay. However, Chares' cavalry does a much better job against Livius' legion and manages to push them back here, although not too far. The legion holds its ground by and large. On the right flank, the most experienced phalanx in the Pontic army starts pushing on the warbands and manages to give them some setbacks as well, although not pushing them back into retreat just yet. Just next to them though, the phalanx beside them manages to push back one of the weaker Roman legions and starts pushing units back towards the camp. And the skirmishers here do an opportunistic charge into the flank of the warbands, although the warbands manage to hold them off. From a slightly laggard position here, the phalanx in the middle of the field here tries to charge into combat here. Unfortunately, it fails to make the distance, and that causes a reversal of fortune, play passing over to the Romans. Their more experienced legion here tries to have a good fight against the stubborn phalanx in front of them. That phalanx remains stubborn and goes nowhere. Their less experienced fellows on the left also try to go at the same phalanx. However, it's a very bloody engagement and both sides fall back, although they manage to retain good order. With the warbands now outflanked, the phalanx pushes hard here and manages to drive them back some distance. And next to them, the phalanx again pushing hard on this weaker Roman legion manages to drive it and its fellows back towards camp. On the centre left here, the Pontic forces just hold their line because they have got lots of support here and they're just mutually supporting each other. No need to go charging in here really. And at this stage, the Romans have built up quite a few setback cards, so just like the last battle, Chares decides to call Homunculus Est to try and fatigue the Roman army, and then after that, he'll try and trash them once again. Once again, the first stage works, and the Roman forces are now fatigued. The Romans are still trying to beat off the cavalry with missile fire, however, it's having no effect. And while the cavalry can't do anything back to them, Chares and his cavalry cause great suffering on Livius' legion. They manage to drive them back forcefully, and not only that, they capture Livius in the pursuit, killing the general and driving his legion from the field. Not only does that knock out a legion and take out the general, they also capture the eagle and completely wipe the Roman command board. They have no rerolls left now. So after that disaster, it's pretty much a one-way trip for the Romans here. So let's just take a quick look at the action as it wrapped up. On the left here, the cavalry were facing off against merely skirmishers. It wasn't going to take too long until they were driven off. And it was only a couple of turns before those skirmishers were fleeing the battlefield. On the right here, the phalanx kept pushing on the warbands and eventually drove them back some distance. The warbands tried to charge back in at one point. However, they managed to cause setbacks on themselves by smashing into the phalanx and getting driven back badly, causing the rear unit of warbands to flee. And then the pike phalanx just moved up and mopped them up, pushed them off the battlefield as well. The only effective resistance the Romans had was the two legions on the centre right fighting with the Thureophoroi and the weaker phalanxes here. There was a lot of toing and froing between these units. Sometimes the Romans were getting driven back, and other times the Thureophoroi were suffering a bit here as well. However, this rather veteran legion was unable to push through the stubborn phalanx as well. While the Roman legion here at the foot of the hill was driven back up the hill as well towards camp. Sometimes there were setbacks on both sides as grind results took effect. And sometimes the Romans managed to charge down the hill and cause some minor setbacks. But it wasn't very long until the cavalry, released from the flank, managed to charge into the flanks of the Roman legions here. That caused lots of angst and suffering, and eventually those legions were routed from the field. In front of the camp, one of the phalanxes just kept pushing here, managed to drive one of the legions back through the camp and off the table, and then the second one as well, and then it set about looting the camp. It took a little while for them to get in there, but they managed it in the end. And that left one legion only on the field for the Roman side, and in the end, they surrendered. So in post-battle, Livius's army is no more. Livius himself is dead. 3 of his legions, that's half of his legions, including his most experienced and battle-ready legions, were all disbanded as a result of this. The survivors scattered to the winds, and now the Romans really have no effective force to be able to stop the forces of Pontus from ravaging through this area of Greece. The forces of Pontus, meanwhile, have built up a lot of experience, and they'll use that in the area until the arrival of Sulla, maybe in the coming campaign season. So just as a quick review of what happened in this campaign, just a few notes. It was a little bit situationally one-sided here. This has nothing to do with the rules of strength and honor. It's just how the situation worked out. Basically, you had regular Pontic forces going up against what were really second-rate Romans. The Romans here were late Republican Romans that are armies hastily raised to deal with insurrections, right? So these were not your top-of-the-line Roman troops. And so that was shown up in the stats. The pike phalanx, the core of the Pontic army, had a combat rating of 4 versus most of the raw legions only having a combat rating of 3. That made it very, very hard for the Romans to pick fights where they had any advantage. It was much, much easier for the Pontic side to pick advantageous fights. The other thing that happened was that campaign experience mattered quite a bit. The Pontic forces, by winning the first 2 battles, were managing to get a lot of benefits before those benefits also accrued to the Romans. So for example, the Pontic forces picked up a couple of units with +1 combat rating. Some of their phalanxes ended up with the stubborn trait, which made them very hard to break. And one of the skirmishers got ambush, which played a pivotal role in the 4th battle. But at the end of the day, it's warfare. It's not warfare. These battles are not meant to be even. History is not that way. History is often one-sided. And Strength and Honor is giving a good reflection of those things, I think. So I've quite enjoyed doing this campaign. I may do another one in the future, but I think we might leave this one here for now. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that analysis of Battle 5 and the campaign as a whole. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon.